Picture a place twice the size of Texas, with fewer people than San Francisco. Alaska has 663,000 square miles, but only 733,000 residents. That's barely one person per square mile. So why does America's largest state feel like an empty, frozen wasteland? Could you survive where winter temperatures hit minus 80 degrees and your nearest neighbor might be 50 miles away? The reasons go far deeper than just cold weather. Alaska's weather doesn't just get cold, it gets apocalyptically, life-threateningly cold in ways that would make a Minnesota winter feel like spring break. We're talking about temperatures that hit minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit in Fairbanks, where your breath freezes instantly and exposed skin suffers frostbite in under 2 minutes. That's colder than the surface of Mars on a good day. But the cold is just the beginning. Barrow, now called Utqiagvik, experiences 65 straight days of total darkness every winter. Imagine not seeing the sun for over 2 months. Seasonal depression becomes a medical emergency when your body literally forgets what daylight feels like. Meanwhile, coastal areas like Valdez get hammered with over 300 inches of snow annually. That's 25 feet of snow, enough to bury a two-story house. Then there's permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that covers 80% of Alaska. It might sound harmless, but permafrost makes building anything a nightmare. Your foundation cracks, your pipes burst, and your driveway becomes a skating rink that never melts. In Fairbanks, residents pay up to $4,000 each winter just to keep their homes from freezing solid. The weather isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively hostile to human survival. Power outages during blizzards can be deadly, and rescue crews often can't reach stranded motorists for days. Even summer brings its own problems, with 24-hour daylight disrupting sleep patterns and massive mosquito swarms that locals call Alaska's unofficial state bird. But even if you can handle the cold, getting anywhere becomes the next nightmare. Alaska isn't just geographically remote, it's trapped on an island of isolation that makes getting anywhere feel like planning a space mission. There are literally no roads connecting Alaska to the rest of America. Zero. If you want to drive to the lower 48, you have to go through Canada on a single highway that's often closed due to weather, avalanches, or wildlife. Flying out isn't much better. A round-trip ticket from Anchorage to Seattle regularly costs over $800, and that's considered cheap. From smaller cities like Fairbanks or Juneau, you're looking at over $1,000 just to visit family in the continental United States. Many Alaskans haven't left the state in years, simply because they can't afford to. But here's where it gets really wild. Over 200 Alaskan communities have no road access at all. Places like Bethel, Kotzebue, and Nome can only be reached by small aircraft or boat. Imagine living somewhere that Amazon can't deliver to, where a medical emergency means waiting hours for a bush pilot to brave dangerous weather conditions. The Alaska Marine Highway System, the state's ferry network, sounds like a solution until you realize it takes 4 days to get from Bellingham, Washington, to Anchorage. That's assuming the ferries are running, which they often aren't due to budget cuts and mechanical problems. This isolation creates a supply chain nightmare that affects everything from fresh vegetables to prescription medications. When bad weather grounds flights for days, entire communities can run out of basic necessities. And this isolation directly impacts how much everything costs to live there. When everything has to be flown or shipped thousands of miles, your grocery bill becomes a mortgage payment. A gallon of milk in rural Alaska costs $8. That's not a typo. $8 for something that costs $3.50 in Seattle. A simple McDonald's meal runs $15, and don't even think about ordering pizza delivery to most places because it doesn't exist. The sticker shock goes way beyond food. Heating bills during Alaska's brutal winters average $400 to $600 per month, and that's if you're lucky enough to have natural gas. Many Alaskans rely on heating oil that can cost over $5 per gallon when delivered to remote areas. Some families spend more on heating than most Americans spend on rent. Housing costs in Anchorage have skyrocketed beyond reason. The median home price hit $450,000 in 2024, while rental vacancy rates hover around 1%. That means even if you can afford the $1,800 average rent for a basic apartment, you might not find one available. But here's the real kicker. Basic utilities like electricity cost nearly double the national average. Internet service, when available, runs over $100 monthly for speeds that would embarrass a dial-up connection. Even bottled water costs more than beer in some Alaskan communities. According to the Alaska Department of Labor, living in Alaska costs 28% more than the national average. But in remote areas, it's often double or triple. Families routinely fly to Seattle just to buy clothes and household items because it's actually cheaper than shopping locally, even with airfare included. These costs hit hardest because job opportunities remain severely limited. Alaska's economy runs on three things: oil, fish, and tourists. That's it. If you're not working on the North Slope drilling for crude, hauling in salmon during the brief summer season, or serving overpriced coffee to cruise ship passengers, your career options get pretty thin, pretty fast. Oil dominates everything. 60% of Alaska's entire state budget comes from petroleum revenue, making it more dependent on a single industry than almost any other state. When oil prices crash, the whole economy crashes with it. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline employed thousands of workers during construction in the 1970s, but today it needs just 800 people to operate. Tourism offers jobs, but they're seasonal and low-paying. You might make decent money guiding fishing trips or working at a lodge during the summer, but come October, you're filing for unemployment. Most tourism jobs pay around $15 per hour, which sounds okay until you remember that gallon of milk costs $8. The fishing industry faces similar problems. Commercial fishing can be lucrative, but it's dangerous, seasonal, and increasingly regulated. Plus, climate change is shifting fish populations, making traditional fishing grounds less reliable each year. The result? Alaska's average annual salary sits around $62,000, which would be decent anywhere else, but barely covers basic expenses when everything costs double. College graduates routinely leave for Seattle, Denver, or anywhere with more than three viable career paths. The Alaska Department of Labor reports that the state loses about 2,000 working-age residents annually to outmigration. The lack of jobs particularly impacts young people and families. Alaska's young people are voting with their feet, and they're walking straight out of the state. Rural villages have lost 40% of their population since 1990, and it's not because people are dying off. They're packing up and leaving for places with actual futures. The numbers tell a devastating story. Alaska's median age has climbed to 35.9 years, well above the national average of 38.4. In some remote communities, the median age has hit 50 or higher. When your typical resident is closer to retirement than starting a career, you've got a demographic time bomb on your hands. School districts are closing left and right because there aren't enough kids to fill classrooms. Since 2000, Alaska has shut down over 60 schools, mostly in rural areas where entire graduating classes might have 3 students. The Aleutian Region School District serves an area larger than California, but has fewer than 300 students total. Healthcare workers are fleeing too. Alaska loses nurses and doctors faster than it can train or recruit them, creating a shortage that affects everyone. When the few young professionals who might stick around can't find adequate medical care for their families, they join the exodus south. The Alaska Department of Labor projects the state will lose another 50,000 residents by 2030 if current trends continue. That's nearly 7% of the current population simply vanishing. Rural Alaska is becoming a collection of aging communities with no one left to maintain basic services or keep local economies alive. Healthcare becomes critical when you're dealing with such challenging conditions. When you have a heart attack in rural Alaska, your survival often depends on weather conditions and whether a pilot is willing to risk his life to save yours. Alaska has just 174 doctors per 100,000 people, compared to the national average of 277. In many villages, your medical professional is a village health aide with basic training, not a physician. Emergency medical evacuations cost between $50,000 and $100,000 per flight. Insurance doesn't always cover these costs, leaving families bankrupt even if the patient survives. Bad weather can ground medevac flights for days, turning treatable emergencies into fatal delays. The Alaska Air National Guard's rescue helicopters save hundreds of lives annually, but they can't reach everyone in time. Mental health care is virtually non-existent outside major cities. Alaska has the highest suicide rate in America at 24.9 deaths per 100,000 people, nearly double the national average. The isolation, darkness, and economic stress create a perfect storm for depression and substance abuse. But finding a psychiatrist might require flying to Anchorage and waiting months for an appointment. Many communities rely entirely on telemedicine, assuming their internet connection works. When it doesn't, people with chronic conditions like diabetes or heart disease are essentially on their own. The nearest hospital might be a 6-hour flight away, assuming you can afford the charter plane and weather permits takeoff. Village health aides do heroic work with limited resources, but they're treating everything from broken bones to complicated pregnancies with supplies that might not be restocked for months. Beyond health emergencies, basic infrastructure remains decades behind. Alaska's infrastructure makes developing nations look high-tech. 63% of Alaskans lack access to broadband internet, leaving them digitally stranded in an increasingly connected world. When your internet crawls at dial-up speeds and costs over $100 monthly, working from home becomes impossible and kids can't complete online school assignments. Power grids fail regularly and catastrophically. Rural communities endure blackouts lasting weeks, not hours. In 2022, a single equipment failure left Nome without power for 11 days during winter. Imagine your refrigerator, heating system, and life support all shutting down when it's minus 30 outside. Many villages rely on diesel generators that break down constantly and cost a fortune to fuel. Water and sewer systems face unique challenges you'd never imagine. Permafrost makes traditional underground pipes impossible in many areas, so communities use above-ground utilidors that freeze solid when heating systems fail. Some villages still use honey buckets instead of flush toilets because installing septic systems in permanently frozen ground costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per home. Alaska's infrastructure backlog exceeds $3 billion according to state estimates, but that's probably conservative. Bridges built in the 1960s are crumbling, airports lack basic navigation equipment, and harbors need complete reconstruction. The Alaska Marine Highway Ferry System operates vessels from the 1960s that break down so often they're nicknamed the delay boats. When basic utilities fail this frequently, maintaining any semblance of modern life becomes a daily struggle against forces beyond your control. These modern challenges connect to Alaska's unique settlement history. Alaska was never meant to be home. It was built to be strip-mined, fortified, and abandoned when the resources ran out or the strategic value disappeared. From day one, settlers came to get rich quick and get out, creating a boom-and-bust mentality that still haunts the state today. The Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 brought 100,000 fortune seekers to Alaska in just 2 years. Towns like Skagway exploded from 0 to 20,000 residents practically overnight. But when the gold played out, these communities collapsed just as fast. Today, dozens of ghost towns dot the Alaska landscape, complete with abandoned saloons and empty mine shafts. World War II and the Cold War brought another wave of temporary residents. The military built massive bases like Elmendorf and Eielson, pumping federal dollars into the economy. At one point, military personnel and their families made up nearly 20% of Alaska's population. But as geopolitical priorities shifted, many bases closed or downsized, leaving communities economically stranded. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline construction in the 1970s created the biggest boom yet. 32,000 workers flooded north for high-paying jobs, pushing Fairbanks' population from 45,000 to 80,000 almost overnight. But pipeline jobs lasted only 3 years. When construction ended, thousands left, leaving behind overbuilt infrastructure and inflated real estate markets. Native Alaskan communities faced forced relocations and cultural disruption throughout this process, losing traditional hunting grounds to development projects that promised prosperity but delivered dependency. Resource dependence continues shaping Alaska's unstable economy today. Alaska's economy rides a roller coaster powered by forces completely beyond its control. When oil prices crash, the entire state crashes with them. Since 2012, Alaska's oil revenue has plummeted 85%, from over $8 billion annually to just $1.2 billion in 2023. That's not a recession. That's economic collapse. The Permanent Fund Dividend, Alaska's famous annual payout to residents, tells the whole story. In 2015, every Alaskan received $2,072. By 2023, that payment had shrunk to $1,300, with politicians threatening to eliminate it entirely. Imagine your state government literally running out of money to pay its citizens. Alaska's fishing industry faces its own crisis. Salmon runs have declined dramatically due to warming ocean temperatures and changing currents. The 2023 salmon season was so poor that many fishing communities declared economic disasters. Crab populations in the Bering Sea have crashed so severely that entire fisheries shut down, putting thousands out of work overnight. Mining provides little stability either. Commodity prices swing wildly based on global markets that Alaskans can't influence. When zinc prices dropped in 2019, the Red Dog Mine, one of Alaska's largest employers, laid off hundreds of workers with just weeks' notice. Tourism, supposedly Alaska's economic diversification strategy, remains seasonal and weather-dependent. Cruise ship cancellations due to storms or mechanical problems can devastate entire coastal communities that depend on summer visitor spending to survive the winter. Climate change adds another layer of challenges to an already difficult situation. You'd think global warming would make Alaska more livable, but it's actually making everything worse. Alaska is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, and that rapid change is destroying the infrastructure people depend on to survive. Permafrost melting is turning solid ground into quicksand. Buildings that stood for decades are suddenly sinking, cracking, and collapsing as their foundations literally melt away. In Fairbanks, homes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars have become worthless overnight when permafrost thaw makes them uninhabitable. Repair costs often exceed the home's value, leaving families trapped in mortgages for houses they can't live in. Coastal erosion is swallowing entire communities. Shishmaref, a village of 600 people, loses 22 feet of coastline annually to rising seas and disappearing sea ice. The entire community faces relocation at a cost exceeding $180 million. At least 12 other Alaskan villages need immediate relocation due to erosion, but there's no funding or plan to move them. Wildlife patterns that sustain native communities for thousands of years are collapsing. Caribou migration routes have shifted unpredictably. Ice roads that connected remote villages now form too late and melt too early, and traditional hunting seasons no longer align with animal movements. Infrastructure built for predictable freeze-thaw cycles is failing catastrophically. Airports designed for frozen ground are buckling, roads are becoming impassable sinkholes, and water treatment plants are sinking into thawed permafrost. The estimated cost to adapt Alaska's infrastructure to climate change exceeds $5 billion, money the state simply doesn't have. These mounting challenges explain why Alaska remains America's beautiful but empty frontier.